Hello and welcome. Political shockwaves are reverberating through Malaysia following that country's national elections last weekend. The results denied the long-ruling UMNO coalition a crucial two-thirds majority in parliament and swung control of 5 key states to the opposition, catching everyone by surprise, it seems, except the opposition coalition. Well, despite a virtual media blackout, opposition rallies drew thousands of supporters from across the country, many of whom ignored Malaysia's traditional racial divides in order to participate. For now, Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi maintains a slim parliamentary majority and is holding on to his leadership post despite calls for his resignation. This is while the opposition, made up of the left-leaning Ethnic Chinese Democratic Action Party DAP, the Islamist PAS Party and former Deputy Premier Anwar Ibrahim's Keadilan Party, finds itself in a unique position inside the government, one of leadership. We talked to 2 of the key players in the opposition and asked them if they can hold together the multi-ethnic coalition that brought them victory and how they plan to deliver on their campaign promises when much of the country's political machinery is still controlled by the ruling UMNO coalition. Joining us now from Kuala Lumpur is the former Deputy Premier of Malaysia and de facto leader of the Keadilan or People's Justice Party, Anwar Ibrahim. Although Dr. Ibrahim is currently banned from seeking political office, he campaigned extensively across the country in the lead up to the general election. I'm also joined by Lim Kit Siang, a prominent long-time leader of the Democratic Action Party, or DAP, and a member of the parliament representing the state of Perak. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Dr. Anwar, I have to start by asking you, you've been fairly coy about the idea that you might run for parliament when you're eligible within in a couple of weeks, April the 15th. What's your plan on that? Can you give us any idea?
Thank you, Riz. We have the option, but that's not the priority. The priority is to ensure that the opposition remains cohesive, manage the government, the state governments that we are now presently in control, and including the federal territory, although it's not a state government. So we actually virtually have 6 of the main states under the ruling, under the opposition. So I think that should be the priority, how we manage our affairs, how we can be seen to be starkly different from the manner the country has been managed, the corruption that was considered very endemic under the present UMNO-led coalition.
Well, considering, Dr. Anwar, considering that the UMNO coalition has been in power for a while, does the opposition party, the coalition, is it cohesive enough, and does it have what it takes to really enact any kind of real change in Malaysia?
There are challenges, no doubt, but then we are stuck to the basic principles, constitutional guarantees, multiracial Malaysia, crafting a new Malaysian economic agenda, and to be very tolerant, accepting the fact that this is a multi-ethnic country. We do not deny the role of Islam, the right to consider the plight of the poor, including the vast majority of the Malays, but then it must be seen, even in the affirmative action program, to be transparent, to ensure that the vast majority, Malays, Chinese, Indians, Ibans, Kadazans, are given a fair deal.
Lim Kit Siang, that's an interesting point that, for the first time, perhaps, ethnic Malays were voting for DAP, the Ethnic Chinese Party. They were crossing racial boundaries, division and cultural divisions. Considering that these ethnic divisions and racial divisions have been so strong in Malaysia and such a key point to some of the problems that are occurring, what do you make of this change? The fact that people are now crossing these boundaries to vote for candidates that don't represent their own racial groups?
I think what is most significant about the March the 8th political tsunami is that there's a wind of change which is supported by Malaysians of all racial groups. It covers Malays, the Chinese, the Indians, and that is why, in fact, in Parliament today, all the opposition parties are more representative, are more inclusive than the Barisan National parties. There are more Chinese members of parliament in the opposition ranks than the National Front, more Indian members of parliament than in the National Front, and as far as Malay MPs are concerned, the opposition has a very strong representation, including in Sabah and Sarawak. And I think that is why, for the first time, it is not possible to play the May 13 card in order to frighten the voters that this is a racial thing. It is all races, all Malaysians coming together for change.
Dr. Anwar, there have been some contradictory statements from you about protecting the Malay position politically and economically, and that you would end Malaysia's new economic policy, the NEP. But which is effectively an affirmative action for ethnic Malays. Now, I wonder, how do you explain this contradiction, and what do you say to the Malay community and to your ethnically diverse partners in the coalition who have been hoping, obviously, for a different change? Let me put it to you in terms of an email we got from David in Singapore, who says, what you are trying to accomplish in dismantling the NEP, many would say, is nothing short of political suicide.
No, Riz, there's no contradiction here. We are committed to support and assist the vast majority of the Malays and the Bumiputras who are poor and marginalized. And I've not faced any difficulty in assuring my non-Malay colleagues of this. What is being questioned is that in doing so, it is based on race. It must be based on merit. The deserving must be helped regardless whether they are Malays, Chinese or Indians. There are Chinese who are in the slums and the squatter areas around Kuala Lumpur. There are Indians who are marginalized in the estate sector. In doing so, it's not a zero-sum game. It is still a predominantly Malay country, and we cannot have a position where the Malays remain poor and marginalized. The major criticism of the new economic policy is that the policy firstly is based on race. You actually deny the rights and be perceived as discriminatory against the rest. Secondly, billions of dollars are squandered to enrich the few. Families of ministers and the rich UMNO members are really super rich, using and exploiting the new economic policy. That is why we are saying it's better to craft a new Malaysian economic agenda that it's competitive, that promotes growth, that is market friendly, at the same time believes in distributive justice regardless of race.
Now, you've touched on some of this, Dr. Anwar, but an email that came from Indonesia, from Azhar in Aceh, says, what will your policy be towards ethnic Indians as compared to Malays, and how will you maintain the current economic policies without alienating non-Malays?
The legitimate grievances of the Indians is a fact. I mean, their poverty, unemployment, and also the fact that they feel they're marginalized. There was an incident of demolition of an old Hindu temple, which I think, and as a Muslim, as a practicing Muslim, is not something that we should condone. We must tolerate and respect the right of religious minorities. And I don't find any contradiction or dichotomy here. We have to then, of course, assure and allay the anxieties of the Malays, thinking, or as if they do assume that by assisting the poorer Indians or the slum and the squatter areas by the Chinese, we are doing the expense of the Malays. No, this is a rich country. We have adequate resources. If we can wipe out corruption, if we can have a transparent policy in assisting, vast majority of the Malays will benefit. I have no qualms about that.
Mr. Kit Siang, Dr. Anwar there made a point about the fact that very few have benefited from Malaysia's prosperity where it is, and mentioned that in many cases it's ministers and their families that benefit from this. Now, of course, the complication is that Prime Minister Badawi is criticised sometimes for perhaps supporting members of his family who have positions in the government. Dr. Anwar has his wife and daughter also now in politics. You have your son also in politics. I wonder to what degree Malays or Malaysians in general worry about family politics being very prevalent in Malaysia.
I think not so much family politics, but whether it is what has been described as the CCN, corruption, cronyism, and nepotism involving self-interest. In the era of Dr. Mahathir, Malaysia was infamously identified with these three terms, just like Indonesia Suharto. But under Prime Minister Abdullah Ahmad Badawi, there is a CCN. In fact, it is a CCN squared. And I think what's important is that this must be curbed so that it will not end up with CCN cube. And there's what is saddening and is the cause of this political tsunami on the March 8th is the big gap between the pledges when Prime Minister Abdullah took office 4 or 5 years ago to clean up the government, to lead an incorruptible administration, and his utter failure to deliver his promises, to the extent that former Prime Minister could come out in the open and said that the corruption today is even more serious under his administration, that from under the table it has come above the table. And I think this is something which is, among other things, which is the cause of this March the 8th landslide assault on the Barisan Nasional.
I have to quote the former Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad here, who was talking about his hand-picked successor Abdullah Badawi after this election, and he said, I think he should step down. The Japanese would have performed harakiri. And I wonder, Dr. Anwar, how long can Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi remain in office, remain in power and keep his position, considering the kind of pressure he's getting and considering the kind of very strong statements being made by his erstwhile mentor?
I think Prime Minister Abdullah Badawi is under intense pressure from his own party members, and that will be purely an internal turmoil within the party. And there's also a problem, enough pressure against the deputy because of the issues and complicity in many of the scandals surrounding him. But so I believe, as I see it, is a purely internal problem within the party, and we are going to see beyond this. I don't believe that Prime Minister Abdullah can last this pressure for so much, because the defeat, the disaster defeat, is unprecedented. The clamor for change is virtually unanimous, and you know, in the peninsular Malaysia alone, we have popular support exceeding that of the ruling coalition Barisan Nasional government. So to me, it is more a systemic change that's being demanded. It's not personalities. We have seen prime ministers changing, coming and going. The system continues to rot. So I think whilst I may choose to agree with former Prime Minister Mahathir that he would like to see Abdullah change, but we are talking about what the people are clamoring for is a systemic change in the rot and the corruption and the mismanagement in this country.
Now, Dr. Mahathir, who was also a big supporter of yours at one time, had words for you. He said, I think he, meaning you, is relevant, but he is not going to become Prime Minister of this country. How do you read those words?
Well, he's getting old, and I think leave it. I mean, we leave him alone, let him exercise his right, and I don't believe again that he should be censored like what the national media tends to do, but I don't necessarily agree with him, and I think many Malaysians do not share many of his views now.
Now, Dr. Anwar, there was an email from Kuala Lumpur, from Malaysia, from Rusman, who wrote in saying, it appears you're trying to reorient Malaysia away from the racial politics that have dominated it for 50 years. Why didn't you do this during the 18 years you were in government? Why now?
Well, I was part of UMNO. I was part of the Barisan Nasional government. I worked under that context, that premise. And there were limitations, of course, but that was the past. I think we learned from our experience, we matured in the process, and I spent a good 6 years in solitary confinement, reading, thinking, contemplating, and meditating. And now I think it's time for change. We should urge Malaysians, including many of my friends in the UMNO and the ruling Barisan Nasional Coalition, members of those parties, to come and support the change and the agenda for reform.
I have to ask Mr. Kit Siang here, you know, it was an interesting thing that you had, of course, this, as I mentioned before, this voting across racial lines. But in the past, DAP has lost voters for liaising with the Muslim parties in Malaysia. And I wonder how that mood is being felt by ethnic Chinese voters now. I wonder what the DAP-PAS relationship or DAP-PAS relationship might develop into, especially if promises aren't delivered upon.
The March 8 results have produced a new political scenario, and in some states like the Selangor in particular, in Perak, in the Yaswanaba situation whereby there will be a necessity for the opposition parties to cooperate if we are going to try to make a new governance work. And in view of that, the new scenario, we are prepared to relook at the whole situation, and like in Selangor and even in Perak, to have some form of tentative cooperation with PAS. Our cooperation with the Parti Keadilan, of course, is established, but it is something which I think has to be taken one step at a time. And that is why what happened in Perak today, where there is this announcement of the PAS assemblyman as the Menteri Besar, is something which we have taken as a bag. The DAP Central Executive Committee at its emergency meeting 2 days ago had given the authority for the formation of a coalition government, DAP, PKR and PAS, with either the DAP leader as Menteri Besar or the PKR representative as Menteri Besar. But we have not given any mandate or authority for a coalition government to be headed by a past representative. So this is something which is completely, I think, out of odds what is in line with our present thinking. But it is something I think that is a new challenge to all Malaysians, so the AP and to all Malaysians, as to whether it is possible for the opposition parties to cooperate on the clearly delineated issues. And this is something which I think should be taken one step at a time and not with a big leap.
Well, of course, Dr. Anwar, you said at the beginning of the show there are a lot of challenges facing the opposition parties in Malaysia right now, despite your strong showing in the elections. An email that came from a viewer who's supportive of your efforts but has some advice from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Balachandran Nair says, "You promised to reduce fuel prices and provide free education. You must make clear that you can't fulfill these pledges yet because you didn't win a majority and don't have access to the Petronas profits. To avoid the Barisan Nasional's fate, you must always be proactive and never arrogant." And I wonder really what are the first steps you can take now as a sort of opposition force to enact change? What will be the first steps you take now?
I'm encouraged by the initial announcements by the chief ministers, including the one from Penang, and hopefully this will be echoed throughout. The issue of code of ethics, of transparency, catering for the welfare of the poor segment of the population, at the same time promoting growth, competitiveness, and proper tender procurement procedures, and looking ahead. And I think these are clear signals that the leadership in these states want to make sure that what we promise will be delivered. And issue of prices were decided by the federal government, we need to be patient a bit and push the things ahead, because we remain optimistic that we can mount an effective challenge to the dominance of the UMNO and Barisan Nasional. But I think if you see the personalities involved, I'm really optimistic, because when they are very strict on the issue of the management, of prudence, against waste, against corruption, which is endemic, and therefore they can use these resources other than ensuring there is growth and inviting foreign investments, making sure that it's not a burden to the vast segment of the poorer population.
Well, Dr. Anwar Ibrahim and Mr. Lim Kit Siang, thank you very much for joining us and discussing Malaysian politics today with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Riz.
Thank you for being with us. On tomorrow's show, we talk with the outspoken Grand Mufti of Bosnia about Islam in Europe. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts, send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk is next.